Maybe I'll get used to it in about 8 months, and then we'll stop saving daylight. So we'll figure it out then. There are extra lesson sheets in the back if anybody needs one. And I did send out the link again. Hopefully you save that to your desktop so you can look at them if you'd like. But I'll try to be better about printing them off. And I actually printed off the ones for next week as well. So actually looking ahead a little bit. But before we begin our study tonight, I've asked our brother Roger if he would lead us in prayer.
Our God and our Father in heaven, we bow before you this afternoon to give you thanks for this day, for the blessings that you continue to provide, for the opportunity we've had to gather together as a church and to remember your Son in the manner that he proposed. We pray, Father, that we would continue to seek your will in the things that we do, that we would learn things each and every day that we can apply to our lives to be better able to serve you. We ask now that you be with Randy as he brings this lesson, that it would be thought-provoking, and we could understand it and help us in our daily lives. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so the first question, move this down just a touch. The first question that's asked is, what are the promises? And so I think before we talk about that, just touch base on what are we talking about? What is materialism? We kind of covered this a little bit last night. A week ago. So what is materialism? Is it in the list in Galatians 5? If you go to Galatians 5, do you see materialism up here in the works of the flesh? Say again?
It's works of the flesh. It's the desire to have that around you. That has nothing to do with your spiritual life with God.
Okay, that's good because it actually, I think it was on lesson 7. It's a spiritless view of the world. So you're kind of taking the Holy Spirit, you're taking God's spirit and influence out of everything in the world. Materialism is not actually specified in the works of the flesh, although it does say, and the like. And I think there's selfish ambition, which could kind of fall under materialism. Idolatry, which we looked at, covetousness. Paul talks about in Colossians 3 and verse 5 that covetousness is idolatry. So it's not specifically spelled out in the works of the flesh, but it's definitely woven in there. And the like. Yes. Roger?
And it's anything that you desire, that you strive for, that takes you further and further away from God.
Okay, it takes you further. Okay.
It can be anything.
Okay, good. So we're kind of opening up this section tonight with what are the promises? I mean, that's the title of the lesson, the promises belied by its results. So what are the promises that the world says materialism will give you? Okay, Cindy?
Well, the first one he mentioned is freedom.
Okay.
What do you consider freedom?
Okay. Okay, freedom.
I mean, materialism. I should just, I got myself.
So freedom from what, or freedom to do what?
Freedom to do whatever you want.
Okay, you can do whatever you want. So there's kind of the promise there. All right, some other thoughts here. Yeah.
I'm thinking of like in Ecclesiastes 5 where several are listed because like mirth, pleasure, and laughter is in Ecclesiastes actually 2:1 through 2.
Okay.
And then fine dining in verse 3, and beautiful homes with pools, gardens, orchards, and vineyards.
Okay.
4 and 5, numerous servants to do work for him.
So you're actually getting a little ahead, but that's okay. So those are all the things that Solomon pursued, right? All the things that he did in his pursuit of happiness and fulfillment. He tried all of these things. He didn't withhold his heart from doing anything. I mean, we'll get back to Solomon in a little bit. I'm going to put this thing down. I don't like pointing with that. Kathy.
I was going to say materialism is a false happiness.
Okay.
Happy for a while and then you want more.
Okay, false happiness, or maybe short-lived happiness. I think there's a passage in Hebrews 11 that talks about Moses chose to endure the reproaches of Christ rather than enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. So it's kind of the same thing. It might be happy for a while, but it's not a lasting or an enduring happiness. I think I saw some other hands up. Maybe I didn't. I did.
The Bible tells us, or God tells us in the Bible, to be careful because if you get to the point where you're and say, eat, drink, and be merry, he adds to that and you die, because those things are the things that will take you away. I mean, you're consumed with that.
Okay. And we talked about that last week too, with from Luke chapter 12, and the example of the one who had a bumper crop. And when you read that passage in Luke chapter 12, this is what I will do. I will build bigger barns, and I will say to myself, soul, you've got many goods for many years. Eat, drink, and be merry. So, and I think Paul just read this morning from Ecclesiastes 5 that it's the heritage, it's the gift from God that we are able to create wealth, and we are to enjoy the good of that. So, and I think we talked about the man last week as well, that he was only focused on himself and not focused on anyone else. Okay.
Well, materialism
Yep.
promises happiness, and I mean, we touched on that, but that's one of the things. If I had this, then I'd be happy,
Right.
and so it just balloons and continues to go forward.
And the bar keeps
Right.
moving. And the author talks about that. Who has not heard, you have a comment.
I've always looked at it as what you're discussing, it's like keeping up with the Joneses.
Okay.
You get more money so you can buy nicer things. I said, my uncle once put it to me like this, he said, the more you make, the more you spend. It's an ever increasing cycle that you go through. I said, because you don't sit there and live off of what you used to live off and maybe have some nicer things. I said, you start getting more and more things. You do more and more things with your money, and you end up spending a lot more. And it's all because you want to live that better life. But there's things you end up ignoring.
I think a wise man talks about that in Ecclesiastes. Yeah. So has anybody not heard of the parable of the investment banker and the Mexican fisherman? The parable of the investment banker and the Mexican fisherman. You haven't heard that?
Please enlighten us.
Okay. Well, I have it written out here, but I'm going to do my best to paraphrase it. But basically, the successful American investment banker is on vacation in a small Mexican village, and he sees a Mexican fisherman come in with his small boat and with his small catch of fish, and starts to talk to the Mexican fisherman and ask him, and is very impressed with his catch. And he said, how long have you been out today? And he said, only for a little while. And so the banker or the investment then asks him, well, why don't you stay out longer and catch more fish? And the fisherman replied he had enough to support his family and his needs. And so the investment banker says, well, what do you do with the rest of your time? What do you do with the rest of your time in the day? And the fisherman replies, I wake up at sunrise, I fish a little every day, I play with my children, I take a siesta with my wife, and then in the evening I go into town where I play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life, senor. This was the fisherman. Some of you have not heard this before. Okay. The investment banker scoffed. I'm an Ivy League MBA, and I could help you. You could spend more time fishing and the proceeds buy a bigger boat, and then you could buy several boats until you have a whole fleet. And then instead of selling your catch to the middleman, you could sell directly to the processor and maybe eventually open your own cannery and controlling the product and distribution. Of course, you'd have to leave this small coastal village and move to Mexico City where you could run your growing enterprise. And the fisherman asked, well, how long will this take? He says, 10 to 15 years. And then what? You'd be very rich. You could make millions. And then the fisherman asks, well, then what? Kind of reminds me of the preacher questions. Well, then what, then what? What are you going to do? Then what? Kind of thing. Then the investment banker replies, then you could retire, move to a small coastal fishing village where you could wake at sunrise, fish a little bit, play with your kids, take a siesta with your wife, and in the evening, go into town where you could play guitar with your amigos, which is exactly what this guy is doing right now. So anyway, for those of you who haven't heard that before, that's the parable of the investment banker and the Mexican fisherman. So, and kind of different views of what contentment is, and it kind of ends up with the same result of where the guy was at already. Anyway, I thought I would share that with you. If you hadn't heard that before, now you have. And again, it reminds me of the question that preachers or evangelists often ask is, what then? So, talking to the young man that's going into college, what are you going to do? I'm going to be an engineer, and then what? I'm going to get a job, and blah, 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 and then what? I'm going to retire, and then what? That kind of thing. When Terry and I first got married, Terry worked at Circle K. For those of you who don't know what Circle K is, it's kind of like a 7-Eleven. It's a 7-Eleven. They have them in Idaho, too. So she worked at the 7-Eleven in Blackfoot, Idaho, and for a while she worked from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. I was working at an engineering site and on rotating shift work, so on occasions we would be on the same shift, and on other occasions we would be on completely different shifts. But when she was with child with Joshua, we decided that we agreed that it would be best if she stayed home, especially while I was in the military and on rotating shift work. And that was the decision that we made when we were pretty young. Anyway, so yeah, we talked about freedom to do whatever you want to do is what's promised. We have all these time-saving devices, and yet we find out we're so busy, which is kind of amazing because we have all these time-saving devices, and yet for some reason we don't have time to do a lot of things. Okay, so what did Solomon pursue? This goes to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, so let's go over to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. What did Solomon pursue? And I think Lee kind of mentioned a few of these. What did Solomon pursue in order to try to find happiness for his heart? And I think I need to catch up a little bit. Yeah.
Seems like everything, he denied himself nothing.
Okay.
According to verse 10.
Yeah, I think the author kind of points out that a lot of the things that Solomon pursued seem to be a lot of things that we might pursue today, or that our society might pursue. I think we started out with mirth and laughter. I think we even have shows and clubs that are devoted to comedy. So, and often poke satire at things that are happening. And I think, like Kathy said, these are often short-lived feelings of happiness when you go experience things like that. Okay, what else? What else did Solomon pursue in an effort to fill his heart? Alcohol? Okay. Alcohol and fine dining? Okay. It's nice to enjoy a good meal every now and then. Houses? Okay. He made his works great. Verses 4 and 5 and 6. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. Sounds very similar to the man in Luke chapter 12, and built the bigger barns, and I will provide for myself. Okay, what else did he have or acquire?
Stuff.
Okay, things, lots of things, and lots of people to manage those things, and all of the managing of all the people that were managing all of the things. So, kind of goes along with what David mentioned earlier, and I think he even talks about that here in Ecclesiastes, that the more that you increase, the more that there are those who use the increase. And sometimes that's by our own choosing. So he had riches, he had singers, he had music. He became great and excelled more than all before in Jerusalem. And then you read down in verse 10 and 11. I think I actually had a little bit of this. I think I have a little bit on there. Yep. He says down in verse 10 and 11, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. And then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity, or fleeting, and grasping for the wind, no profit under the sun. So on one hand, he says that he rejoiced in his labor at the end of verse 10, which is kind of what Paul read from Ecclesiastes 5 this morning. But then on the other hand, he recognizes that it's fleeting. It's like grasping for the wind. I think in other areas he talks about grasping for oil. If you've ever changed oil on a car and you get it on your hands, it's kind of hard to keep in your hands. So, I don't know how much people change oil on their cars anymore, by the way. There's lots of convenient places where you can drive in and other people will change the oil for you. But yeah, he rejoiced in that, and it was like grasping for the wind. He said there was no profit. So this kind of falls under the promises of materialism, and he had kind of this fleeting reward, but it wasn't a lasting reward. And so the question that the author asks us is, question 2 is, why did he not find happiness in this? Yeah, John?
A good time to answer that one. Solomon was in kind of a unique position. Imagine if we, you, me, any one of us, all of a sudden came into, let's pick a number, $50 million fell into our bank account from whatever source. Doesn't matter. Won't say the lottery because people will blame me for gambling. Okay, so let's just say all of a sudden we've inherited all of this money. That's what happened to Solomon. Solomon was given much wealth, much wisdom, much possessions from God directly as king for what he asked for. If we were in that same position where we were given tons of money, all of a sudden we're kind of in that same position of what now?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've heard, and I brought this up to you last week, it turns out that in many instances, money can become a personality amplifier. When you have a lot of it, not when you are in pursuit of it, because you have to start small and end up big, and that's different as far as the sacrifices go. But if you have it the way Solomon had it, or if we have an instantaneous, what do you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, like, money can be a personality amplifier. If you are a selfish, materialistic person, it will make you worse. If you are a giving, kind person, it will make you better, or can make you better. So, materialism is psychological to the point where I have a lot of decisions to make. Solomon in particular, his life, or a lot of people's lives that we see go bad after they've won the lottery, are spiritually empty. In a lot of the things that we read about in Ecclesiastes of what he tried, they were spiritually empty, God absent. But if we were to reverse that, what kind of person would he have been? What kind of experiences would he have had? Same thing could go for us.
Yeah, and what's amazing about Solomon is he never asked for wealth. He asked for wisdom, and then God granted him wisdom and granted him the wealth.
Yep.
But even with the wisdom of Solomon, he still allowed others to influence him, which we read about in 1 Kings chapter 11. So before we get a little further in why Solomon did not find happiness, let's look in 1 Kings chapter 11. I think we need to just take a little bit of time over here and nose into this a little bit. Hey, let's have somebody read verses 1 through 8. Nice and loud. Okay, David.
King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their God." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, and the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of Sidonians and Moab, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods.
Okay, thank you, David. So Solomon allowed the influence of his many wives to turn his heart away from the Lord. And so it just shows how much influence that they had, and one thing that he didn't withhold his heart from anything, including the 1,000 women, and they deterred him from serving God fully, which is what the account reads here. And the result is in verse 9, so the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. And so you can see the results there as you continue reading. So Solomon allowed that, and I think as you read through Ecclesiastes, my understanding is that's kind of even after this point where he I believe, repented of that. But think of the impact that it had on him and his family, and the whole nation. It split the nation, and so the impact that his sin had on him. So John really hit on it that when God is not in everything that we do, I think in all we do in word or deed, we're supposed to do all in the name of the Lord, even our jobs, even our role as a father or as a husband, whatever our role is, we are to do all for the Lord like we're working for the Lord. So God has to be in every activity that we do. And so I think the author talks about that if the spiritual guidance of God is lacking, then all these earthly pursuits will bring no reward at all. And I think I had this little pyramid up here. I think some of you probably have seen this before. The old pyramid of needs kind of thing. And so I think Paul talks about having food and clothing. With this we shall be content. And as you look here, as you move up, you can see employment and family. We see connections and friendship. And you can kind of see some of the lines kind of blur in between them. And then at the top is this kind of self-actualization. And I think there are other religions that kind of talk about reaching nirvana and reaching oneness with everything. And that's kind of what these hierarchy of needs are. But again, if you don't see anything in here about God, I think there is some mention of spirituality in here. There's morality at the top. Thought I remember seeing something about spirituality in there. I do not see spirituality in there. But there is morality at the top there, which is another interesting study of what is the source of morality. Because there are a lot of moral people who don't believe in God. So anyway, that just a little side trip there. But yeah, if we don't have God woven into everything that we are doing, then it's not going to bring any reward. And so I think we can go to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. It's after Proverbs in my Bible. There it is. And I think David talked about this earlier. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 11, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. So that's kind of the same thing. And then talking about in verse 10, whoever loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This is also vanity. There are some folks out there that will give you advice on finances. I have listened some to Dave Ramsey and appreciate some of his thoughts. Some of you have asked me, how are you doing? And I will say I'm better than I deserve. And I kind of like that response. But one of the things that Dave Ramsey says is live like no one else so that you can live like no one else, so that you can give like no one else. So this is kind of not what we see with Luke chapter 12 and the man who had the big crop. He was living like no one else, but he wasn't thinking about giving like no one else. So anyway, that's just a little thought there about as we're pursuing supporting ourselves, supporting our families, and thinking about how much is enough and what our motivation should be. There's several different folks out there that will have different philosophies. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. So these are kind of going into Solomon not finding happiness in his possessions where he didn't have God woven in there. And then we have back in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, somebody read verses 18 and 19, please. Ecclesiastes 2, 18 and 19. Okay, Kathy?
Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity.
Vanity or fleeting again. So again, here's Solomon, who had more wealth than any ever before, and he's saying, what good was all of this labor that I did when I have to pass it on to somebody, and who knows whether that person is going to use it wisely or use it foolishly. And I think we've seen this in our society, where you have children of very wealthy people, and they just go off and do drugs and just squander the really tremendous opportunity that they have been blessed with. And we've seen that in our society today.
We also see the other side. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one thing that I noticed in this lesson. This guy just went off on kids.
Yeah.
And I know that there are children who come from wealthy families who do amazing things.
Yeah.
Is filled with philanthropy, maybe even more so than their parents were. And so, I mean, he uses a broad brushstroke against that. And that's true, that does happen, but the opposite also happens.
Yep.
You know, you mentioned a minute ago that the rich can't sleep. I don't know how many people watch Antiques Roadshow, but we like to watch it. Here's somebody that's got this picture that they have just loved. And then they find out it's worth $200,000. And now it's a burden. Now they have to get it insured, and now they have to be worried about it being stolen. And before it was just a picture on the wall that they liked. And so it just, you know, that kind of thing happens. And you know, we, which is the point of this, a lot of times we don't, if we had the wealth, and this is what John was talking about too, if we had the wealth, it would probably not be good for us.
Yeah. That's interesting. I was just talking Friday afternoon with one of my coworkers, and I asked him, several years ago I saw him, he had a ski boat. I'm like, do you still have your boat? He's like, yeah, I've been trying to sell it. And then he said, he tried to give it to his kids, and his kids didn't want it. And I've heard two things about boats. One is, if you want a boat, you're supposed to go to the pier and like throw $100 bills in the water or something. And then the other is, the happiest day for a boat owner is the day he buys the boat and then the day he sells the boat.
Right.
So I don't know. I'll talk to Henry afterwards.
The other thing, you know, is Solomon, who had all this wealth, and he passed it on to his son, Rehoboam, and look what he did. He wanted more. He said, "Oh, you think my dad was rough on you? Wait till you hear my taxes and all of that." So it can go that way too. No satisfaction.
Amplified it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, Jonathan.
I mean, that's kind of what stood out to me too in this Ecclesiastes verse that we're reading, where he says, "Who knows whether he will be wise or a fool?" This man that he's handing his possessions over to. Well, if you're handing over to your son and you're his father, did you not play a part in his upbringing? And maybe that's part of the burden of wealth, where you're so busy taking care of your possessions that you don't have time to take care of your children. I don't think that that's a good thing. Obviously, I don't think it's a valid excuse. But it just kind of stood out to me like a throwing your hands up in the air, like what if the person I give this to is going to waste it, as if you bear no responsibility in preparing them to take it over.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah, I can see that perspective as well. So, but that was And again, I think Solomon's, as we're reading through this, he's kind of going from extreme to extreme
Yeah.
as he goes through there. And we can see that in the many things that he did. So, as we're thinking about what we're doing, what should be our motivation for the things that we do?
Serving God.
Okay, to serve God. Any other thoughts?
Serve
Okay.
others.
Yeah, serve others. So, and I think we talked about this last week as well. When you look in Matthew, the 6th chapter, Jesus talks about fasting, about praying, and about giving. And if we're doing that so that people see, oh, Randy looks hungry today. Randy, why do you look so hungry? Oh, I'm fasting. Ooh, Randy's fasting today. Then I'm getting the reward from the accolades of people, and that's not to be our motivation. Our motivation has to be out of love for one another, out of love for God, and out of serving one another. Because Jesus clearly taught us that we serve God by serving one another. And so that's I think that has to be our motivation. And it has to be motivated out of love. Otherwise, if I give all my goods to the poor and give my body to be burned and have not love, it profits me nothing. Mark.
I think with the question you just asked, one of the things that comes to mind, particularly you can gain with age, is how valuable time is. And where are we spending our time? Are we investing in relationships? Are we investing in understanding God? Are we investing our time in showing the rest of the world what we believe and why we believe it? I had something happen today that it's just one of those weird coincidences in life. I've got an activity I've engaged in for 20 years, and I always do it manually. And I had a little $50 tool in my hand today that cut like the time I spend on that 50 times. So I thought about how much time I've invested doing this activity for the last 20 years, and what could I've been using that time for. So I think the older I'm getting, the more I'm realizing how limited our time is and how valuable it really is, particularly in our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Roger?
We're in a time now, and you see it every day, when you watch the news or whatever it is you're going to watch, you're going to see that very soon you'll be able to afford this. On and on and on. You can't buy an egg now. You can't buy your milk or a gallon of gasoline. And people worry about that. Well, if they understand God, they understand that He's got ways to keep us with what we need and what's necessary. You know, you've never seen a child of God go without food, and He means that. We're here, we can provide for one another, and whatever it takes, God's going to do. We don't have to worry about the price of eggs or whatever else is going to happen. We will have what we need. Might not be the best steak in the house, but it'll be a steak.
Might not be a steak from the Capitol Grill.
There you go.
Okay. I've not done that, by the way. It's on my list, though.
If you just had a little bit more money, you could go.
If I just had a little bit more.
Yeah, just work a couple more hours.
Work a couple more hours, yeah.
If you had enough, you could go to the Metropolitan.
Oh, better than the Capitol. Okay. What about the influence of TV? I tried to find a picture of one of the most recent television sets available. So the author asked about the influence of TV. I would also suggest movies and internet and social media, since those tend to fill the screens that we look at often. Sometimes Materialism.
Commercials.
Okay. Wait, is there commercials on the internet?
Yes. There is. Facebook's loaded
Yeah.
up.
Isn't it funny, like you go look up, I looked up a part for my 69 VW, and then all of a sudden there's all these little flashy things over here of VW parts.
You don't have to look it up, you just say it.
What's that?
You don't have to look it up.
Oh, just say
You
it.
just have it in conversation and it'll
Phone
put it.
is listening.
Alexa, please find a 69 VW Fender. Okay. And then you're there. Yeah.
I think it's even less blatant than just like an advertisement on Facebook or whatever, because we see the positives in everyone else's lives, and oh, they have all this, and they're doing all these cool travel things, and you don't see all the like not so good parts of it. So it like, makes you want to have all these other things.
Okay. So, yeah, and do people typically post, well, I don't know, I guess I'd be careful. Generally, when you look at somebody's social media account, I'll use myself, I posted a bunch of pictures after I got back of some things that I was able to do in Japan, And if you would look at that, you would think, well, Randy went to Japan and he saw the cherry blossoms in Miura Kaigan. He went to the snow on Saturday. He went to Tokyo on Sunday. It's like, did Randy even do some work? Because, well, first of all, I can't take pictures at where I work. Anyway, and then, we generally, unless you're a carpenter or a builder, you probably aren't going to post pictures of what you do. Dan posts his sermon. So that's what I see Dan posting. But I generally don't post about what I do at work because most of it's classified. But I don't do that. But if you look at my social media account, you're like, oh, Randy went to Japan. That looks great. What a great life. Oh, Randy's dogs are sleeping. It's the high energy zone. My point is, we typically are going to post on things that are good and things that are happening. Some people will post about maybe who's in office or those kind of things. But generally, on your account, you're posting, I think this to Liz's point, things that are good. And so you kind of get this false impression of what people's lives are like. And you don't realize maybe what actually happened Monday through Friday to get to those 3 pictures that were posted on Saturday. So, yeah.
Also, it leads you to believe if I was doing the things they were doing, or if I had the things they had, I could be happy like they are.
I would be happy like they are. Yeah. So I think that's a big caution about social media. And I've heard it said that comparison is the thief of joy. Okay? Because we're looking at what we think somebody's life is like, and we're thinking, well, my life isn't quite like that, so therefore, I'm not as happy as that person. When you don't know everything that's happening in that person's life. Yeah.
We tend to want to guard our children and keep them safe from all the things that we see out there today. And a good friend of mine was preaching one time about being careful how we use things. And on our day, the medium that we have the ability to invite things and people into our houses that we would not open the door for.
Yeah.
We need to think about what we're bringing in, not just letting in the house, but through all the things that we see.
Right. What are we allowing in, and really into our hearts?
Yeah.
Because it's what we're seeing is going into our hearts. So yeah, kind of getting on a little social media tangent here, but I think that's okay. I think it was worth consideration and worth discussing. So, yeah.
It's not just that, it's all the other ways that you can get media. So social media is just one of them, but then you have the YouTube, you have X, you have TV. And it's definitely encourage you not to lead a Christian life. There's very few shows.
Yeah.
I mean, the only one I can think of when my boys were growing up was Duck Dynasty, truly. That's the
pick up with this discussion next Sunday, Lord willing. And this is, we're really kind of talking about question 3, which is the influence of TV and movies. So we'll pick up with this, Lord willing, next Sunday afternoon. Appreciate your participation this evening, and we'll continue with the questions and with lesson 8 next Sunday. Thank you very much.